Привіт! Це подкаст «Коли все має значення». Я Ангеліна Каякіна, а зі мною
Наталка Гуменюк.
Сьогодні в тебе не просто цікава гостя, а ще і твоя давня, близька подруга. Це Ніно Зhizhilashvili, відома грузинська ведуча. Розкажи, будь ласка, за яких обставин ви з нею говорили і про що саме?
Ніно Zhizhilashvili дійсно є телеведучою. Зараз вона веде ключові шоу на опозиційному каналі «Формула» в Грузії і є деканом Кавказької школи журналістики. Вона в грузинській журналістиці, політичній журналістиці останні 30 років. 26 жовтня будуть вибори парламентські в Грузії. Власне, про це також подкаст, який пояснюють, чому вони, скажімо, вирішальні для майбутнього Грузії. Скажімо, це такий момент, як в нас був момент Євромайдану, який Грузія зробить вибір, чи вона зробить проєвропейський вибір, чи назад піверне у якесь проросійське русло. Зараз от саме той момент, де ми б хотіли українцям пояснити, що на кону на цих виборах, які шанси, хто такий цей Біdzina Ivanishvili, який контролює всю Грузію, чого раптом Грузія стала частина її влади проросійською, що з цього пропаганда, гроші, вплив Росії, що з цього реальне, за рахунок чого є ця популярність, який є наратив щодо Кремля, щодо війни проти України, що відбувається з Міхейлом Саакашвілі, яка роль об'єднаної опозиції, яка його роль, яке ставлення до нього в Грузії і ставлення до чинної президентки Саломе Zourabichvili. Я попросила трошки розповісти про те, що були це за протести проти закону про іноземних агентів, чому вони зупинилися, і загалом певних резонансних питань, які відбуваються упродовж останнього часу, скажімо, таких як убивство трансгендерної жінки-моделі, яке відбулося нещодавно, як це з усім пов'язано. І кілька таких, скажімо так, більше геополітичних питань щодо того, а що ж там насправді зараз відбувається в Абхазії, в Південній Осетії після повномасштабного вторгнення. В мене, власне, є відчуття, навіть це моє особисте відчуття, якщо чесно скажу. Я слідкувала за Грузією, була багато разів як журналістка там, це близька для нас багатьох країн, і для мене теж. Але після повномасштабного вторгнення я не так, щоб мала достатньо ресурсу постійно слідкувати тією мірою, якою б я хотіла. Мені здається, що ми якби такий зробили краш-курс з грузинської політики останніх 2 років і тому, що їй передувало.
Ти знаєш, дивлячись на ці картинки з Грузії, постійно в мене крутиться в голові питання, чому в них не виходить. Ми не бачили якихось, повальних арештів, хоча, безумовно, опозиціонери переслідуються і є тиск, і в тому числі тиск на медіа. Ми не бачили якихось насильницьких розгонів страшних чи розстрілів і так далі. А грузини продовжують протестувати, і це дуже велолюдні мітинги, а в них чомусь не виходить. І з кожним місяцем, здається, що ці гайки закручуються сильніше і сильніше. Як так відбувається, в чому феномен, я не можу зрозуміти. Ніби грузини виконують свою домашню роботу, але це, здається, ніби нічого не змінює.
Я так розумію, що вуличні протести, вулична політика перейшла в таку традиційну, класичну політичну історію, де от є вибори, ми мусимо на них перемогти, є, як інколи буває, ніби критична роль диктатора чи авторитарної влади, але опозиція розпорошена, не домовляється. Наприклад, півроку ситуація, здавалося, була сумнішою в плані того, що дійсно опозиція не була об'єднаною, зараз вона об'єднаніша, але, можливо, просто тому, що ми живемо війною, а вони поки живуть оцим циклом вибори. Одна партія перемагає, уривається терпець у населення, коли вже якби крапка, приходить інша, і це не 4 роки, це трошки інший цикл. І я б, звісно...
В них же там недалеко і президентські вибори, тобто незабаром після парламентських, здається,
Президента в них обирає парламент. Вони вже ж стали парламентською республікою, тому парламентські вибори є основоположними. Просто так сталося, що Саломе Zourabichvili, чинна проєвропейська політикиня, вона ж була президенткою цієї партії, грузинської мрії, яку підтримав їхній головний олігарх Bidzina Ivanishvili. Тобто вона змінилася. Це така інша ситуація, в якій є проєвропейська президентка з дуже дрібними повноваженнями, але це радше якась інша зміна.
Скажи, будь ласка, про Ніно, як про журналістку, яка з дуже довгою політичною кар'єрою пережила абсолютно різні періоди в своїй країні. Який в неї досвід? За яких обставин ви познайомились? Чим вона цікава взагалі як людина?
Я в 2005-2006 році в магістратурі вчилася у Швеції. Це була магістратура для журналістів. В нас було дуже багато людей з усього світу, від С'єра-Леоне до Індонезії, Гази і Парагваю. Власне, там була Ніно, яка теж приїхала на навчання. Але я була наймолодшою, однією з наймолодших людей на курсі, ще фактично студенткою, а курс насправді був для людей, які були по 10-20 років в професії, для дуже досвідчених. І в нас був дуже розрив, тому я завжди дивилася на неї як, умовно кажучи, я тоді ще студентка журналістика, а вона ключова журналістка під час революції Троянд. Вона ще свою кар'єру починала, можемо сказати, з протестів грузинських за незалежність Грузії. Вже вона розповідала дуже цікаві історії, наприклад, про те, як вони під час війни десь, коли в 90-ті була складна ситуація, були і певні терористичні атаки, як вони там на той час вже якимось політиком-прокурором разом були з журналістами і десь там в якомусь ущельї ночували разом в одній печері, беручи інтерв'ю у певних на той час екстремістів. Вона розповідала, як вона робила один з перших матеріалів про Саакашвілі. Це був початок 2000-х, і мені здається, що це дуже показова історія про неї як професіонала. Що тоді молодий, мало кому відомий політик Міхейл Саакашвілі дуже критикував на той час таку пострадянську владу за те, що вони корумповані, вони користуються привілеями, їздять на дорогих авто і говорять по телефону дуже дорого, а телефонна розмова – це щось було по мобільному телефону дуже дороге. Вона провела з ним день, він про це розповідав, щоб зробити його портрет, а в кінці сказала, а за цей час Міхейл Саакашвілі говорив стільки-то хвилин по телефону, на що він дуже образився. Це багато її характеризує, але за ці 20 років, мені здається, важливо, нам в українці було цікаво це розповісти. Ми комунікуємо, і в різний час були різні періоди. Я добре пам'ятаю, як вона була редакторкою одного каналу, редакторкою новин, ведучою, але потім закручувалися гайки в медіа. Люди з її каналу, переходили на бік влади, йшли у владу, йшли в політику, ставали тими ж людьми, які колишні, підлегли редактори, які ставали там прокурорами, які потім переслідували там її і її нових колег. Я пам'ятаю, були різні рейтинги, коли її там визнавали одним з небагатьох моральних авторитетів Грузії, яким завжди довіряють. І вона завжди робила цей вибір. До речі, в нас буде це питання в подкасті. Тобто були різні ситуації. Коли Біdzina Ivanishvili став тоді він був прем'єр-міністром, потім він пішов. Вона була цією журналісткою, яка брала там перше його інтерв'ю портретним по Грузії, бо він був доволі закритою людиною. А тепер їхній канал не допускають взагалі до влади. Грузинська влада ігнорує опозиційні ЗМІ. Цього разу після протестів була така розмова і зустріч грузинських журналістів з прем'єром. Вони десь були в якійсь програмі з Ніно колись багато років назад, на кшталт, якоїсь програми типу фонду Сороса, де вони обоє були тренерами, а зараз він ухвалює закон про іноземних агентів, і вона йому може сказати, перепрошую, але ж ми 20 років назад були разом в цій програмі, яка фінансувалася за гроші Сороса. Є дуже багато людей, які там можуть і пізнавати на вулиці, але зараз є такий феномен, що є і певна небезпека, тому що певних її колег в різний час, особливо чоловіків, і били, і застосовували насильство. І що мені дуже заімпонувало, коли Ніно сказала, ти знаєш, що я не можу пробачити цій владі, саме цій владі. Я дуже багато років працюю як журналіст, я ніколи не була активісткою, я все одно була ведучою. Так, я працювала на опозиційних каналах, але я не була активісткою. Цього разу вони змусили мене говорити не як журналістка і, по суті, забирають в мене професію. Я маю висловлювати свою політичну думку, бо інакше вже не можна. І ось цього я не можу пробачити, що мені доводиться йти на таке. Я дуже довіряю думці Ніни. Думаю, що те, що вона розповіла, якось дуже характеризує ту ситуацію, яка є.
Отже, слухаємо розмову Наталки з грузинською відомою журналісткою Ніно Зhizhilashvili.
Nino, thank you so much. It's absolutely crucial for the Ukrainians to know what's going on in Georgia. Our hearts are there. Unfortunately, we don't have much space, to be more present because we have too much on our shoulders here. But I know that even if Ukrainians do not know in details what's going on in Georgia, just because, they're so preoccupied with everyday things happening in Ukraine because of this Russian war, they want to know, they want to understand, they wish the best for Georgia. So maybe you will start to explain what is the current political moment prior to these elections, what is all about, what are the chances, or just generally give the overview. What is in the hearts and minds of the Georgians as of, October 2024?
We have very crucial and very important elections in 26th of October. It's not exaggerated when we are talking about existential moment for Georgian state, because on the one hand we have unfortunately Russian style and pro-Russian government in face of Georgian Dream, which is led by Russian style again oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, and he's in the power despite he's somewhere behind, not on the scene, during 12 years, and he wants to stay in the power for more 4 years. That means we are losing everything, because last week we got a very hard resolution from European Parliament that if Georgian people can't express their will to stay on the right track, that means to stay on the pro-Western track, we are losing everything. We are losing our candidacy status of European Union membership. We are losing even visa-free regime. And we are losing all chances to stay as partners and strategic partners of United States, because our government, actually when we're talking about the Georgian government, we mean only one person, oligarch Ivanishvili, because he's replacing, as you know, the prime ministers, he's replacing ministers. His best inner circle is on the positions of head of, Minister of Interior, head of security services, etc., etc. So he is everywhere. He's controlling everything. He's not alone. He's positioning right now through the support of Russians. The Russian government is not hiding the very positive, emotions and the support towards Ivanishvili, and their prizing for their last steps, Ivanishvili. On another hand, we have various oppositional, type of coalitions. 4 actually of them, according to the different polls, are overcoming threshold, which is 5% for the moment. Of course, the former governmental party, which is the Saakashvili's, party, it is United National Movement, plus some other parties. They joined the United National Movement, and they are getting at around 20%, according to the polls. One more party, which is consists with former UNM members, former National Movement members, and some other very important parties, they are getting at around 13-14%, and 2 other parties are getting, actually the coalitions are getting at around 9-11%. So, for the moment, according to the Edison research, my TV company is collaborating with this company. It's an American company. The last week we had a picture when the Georgian Dream had some 30-33%, and all opposition together were stating that if they are not going to collaborate with Bidzina Ivanishvili after the elections, they are getting at around 57-58%. So opposition needs 51% to elect prime minister and to form the future government. So it is very crucial for Georgians to win these elections. So we have a wide choice of 4 different style and type of parties and coalitions. So they have a chance for the moment. So we are very much hope to have very good results in this respect.
I see you here a bit more hopeful than, it was some time ago because of this unification of the opposition becoming kind of stronger. But maybe just really basic, you would explain why still the Georgian Dream is kind of popular. What is the main point of the elections as a topic? Because we didn't think about this in the terms of like pro-Russian, pro-European, but unfortunately these debates are back to Georgia. How come that Georgia for some time got the government which can be named pro-Russian? What is the policies of this government which you would consider pro-Russian? So it's already there is evidence. There was a time when we couldn't guess, they're trying to, but why we can speak about these parties as a pro-Russian, and are they so openly anti, European Union, and how they come to be so strong still in Georgia?
Everything happened permanently, because in 2012, when Bidzina Ivanishvili won the elections and Saakashvili left the power, it was a coalition of pro-Western parties under Ivanishvili. During these years, all the pro-Western parties left this coalition, left power. So at the final stage, actually after war in Ukraine started, we widely find out that it was all about pro-Russian sentiments, because Georgian government did not support Ukrainian government as much as we expected, as it was a will of Georgian people, and even they started criticizing President of Ukraine. They didn't join the sanctions against of Russia, so everything became more clear than before. So it was kind of a test. If not Russia's, aggression against of Ukraine, maybe Georgian government could, hide their aspirations in a better way than it happened later. After Ukrainian war, the most Georgians realized that something is not as good as we expect in the direction of foreign policy. On another hand, all the conspiracy theories which are Russia spreading all over the world in different countries through their, different tools, are now flow from the Georgian government. Conspiracy theories about the global war party, for example, who decided to involve Ukraine in the war and who involved in the war in 2008 Georgia. And now, during the pre-election campaign, they are naming this some, we don't know exactly who, but of course, U.S. and West and, Europe is meant under that. Some global war party will include Georgia in the war if Ivanishvili will not stay in the power. Georgian Dream is frightening Georgians with war. So they are very much concentrated on the peace. It is circulated by them that without Ivanishvili, the war will be in Georgia like in Ukraine. And even very immoral banners appeared in the streets where you can see the ruined Ukraine with writing war, and Happy Georgia, written peace. By the way, 3 Georgian channels which are critical, which are not under pro-Russian, influences, including my channel, we refuse to broadcast this ad in our ear. So we are fined now through the commission, which is looking after these things, fine, because we refused to broadcast this very, very immoral clip, which is, I can't even explain what kind of emotions Georgians have, because government is speculating through the tragedies of Ukrainians. It's immoral, and, Georgian people are very angry. When I'm speaking about Georgian people, I mean the majority of Georgian people, because we are measuring it weekly, this kind of stuff. So the more than 70% are thinking that Georgia is not a right track, and some 30% think that Georgia is on the right track. And you asked about these 30%, who they are, why they are still supporting pro-Russian government. But you can see on their banners still the stars of European Union flag. Openly, they say that their way is Europe. It is their open message, because they know that more than 70% of Georgians, even under 80, are pro-Western. So it is very dangerous for them to say openly that they are not anymore pro-Western. But they have a huge propagandistic tools, including media, big media outlets. Just I can tell you that Timi Imedi, which is now under Ivanishvili, which is the most powerful media outlet, has the highest rating among Georgian TV channels. And they are circulating all these manipulative and very damaging kind of narratives from Georgian Dream. And they are not inviting opposition, of course, in their studios. And we have a situation when Georgian Dream members, governmental members, even experts supporting them, they are not coming into our studios. So we don't have any access to the Georgian Dream. We can't ask them tough questions. We can't see them. And if some journalists are, following them in the streets or in the corridors of parliament, they are very rude. They are very using a lot of stuff not to answer and to abuse you or harass you. There are still some supporters because of propaganda, because of some benefits, and because of there is still kind of a fear of the Saakashvili's return back. It is one more point which is used by Ivanishvili as a pre-election message.
I'll get into Saakashvili, of course. But before I want to, first of all, I want also to say that this campaign about the war and the peace, in fact, was very much present in a similar way in the Russian-occupied Crimea prior to 2022, when we're saying that hey, Crimeans, this occupation is actually good for you because this is peace. And there, if you resisted, there would be this war as in the Donbass. So, it's quite an old story. I think it was used also in a lot of other contexts. But can you also explain the figure of Bidzina Ivanishvili? Because he's, of course, oligarch, but a very special one. Because in Ukraine, what I understand, we usually have a number of them, and they were changing their political alliances. Sometimes they supported Yanukovych, but then some of them were not there. What I understand is critical for Georgia that you cannot compare anybody to Bidzina Ivanishvili in terms of the capital and the influence. And even when he was, working in Russia as a businessman, since all time he was supporting by money, by payment, pensions, all kind of tricks as a philanthropist, a huge chunk of the Georgian society. So I think he's very unusual oligarch for our style, the one, as somebody who was sometimes said, the man who owns Georgia. You were also one of the first journalists who interviewed him when he became the politicians before he moved from business, when he created the Georgian Dream. So maybe you would explain him and his evolution, degradation, or whatever word we need to use.
You mentioned that in Ukraine you had a different kind of style of oligarchs, and they were balancing somehow each other. This is true that we have only oligarch who is now and under umbrella of Russia in Georgia, and under him nothing is happening without his involvement. As I mentioned, he's appointing and removing prime ministers. Now he is an honoring chairman of ruling party, but it happened some months ago, and before we even could not understand where he was. He has several residential apartments in Georgia, in western Georgia, in his former village, on another part of the Georgian, very nice area. So he's moving, circling around these residences. So you never know where he is, what he's doing, what kind of opinion he has. He's nowhere and everywhere, we can say. He has this kind of image, and he's controlling everything, of course. Under him, of course, the inner circle is working to gain as much money as possible. Every business, huge businesses, big businesses are controlling by his inner circle. Corruption is on the place after Saakashvili. The biggest reform, what he made is anti-corruption reform, what happened after the Rus Revolution in Georgia. But now we have a high level of corruption, of course, again, back, because he's allowing his, marionettes, he's feeding them, if we can say. They are allowed to do what they want to do because they're serving oligarchs. What kind of person he is? He is a very strange person. Personally, he loves trees. For example, last scandal was when he decided to drag trees from Kenya. It was a big scandal in Kenya, even not just in Georgia. He is a very strange person because he loves, different, very exotic animals, keeping them in his house, in the gardens, like penguins, for example. It is kind of a lot of jokes in Georgian about him. So he loves life, to control everything, not to be disturbed much, and just to be somewhere. But as I mentioned, after the war started in Ukraine, he had no any other choice as to go out, as to express his view, force his inner circle and the government to express openly anti-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, anti-Western, anti-US messages. So we realized a little bit later, the majority of Georgians, maybe journalists, had some signs in advance, and we were warning our audience. Of course, for me, for example, it was very clear since 2016, but it was not easy to confirm and to make sure your audience that, it is a fact that he is, tied with Russia. But now there is no any more questions about him. So now he's involved in the pre-election campaign, and when he's moving to the regions, he's in the security kind of the cabin. He's only stayed in the cabin, and all other party members are out of this cabin. So he has a kind of a idea that he could be killed, like Trump was shot. When you see him, you can realize that he has a kind of a scare. He's not anymore reflecting winning, victory. He's frightened somehow, and he's asking Georgian people just vote for him because he is a guarantee of peace in the country. It is only, message from him.
I probably would add to the Ukrainian audience that indeed he made his capital in Russia and is super rich, because we're speaking about billions of dollars of his capital. But you mentioned that partially that one thing what they're trying to scare people is about the return of Mikheil Saakashvili. Of course, I would still also ask you maybe to summarize, because, I think quite a few Ukrainians, they cannot forget, but maybe they just don't follow that after coming from Ukraine, where there was a political career for former Georgian President Mikheil Saakashvili, went to Georgia, where he was imprisoned and he was on the hunger strike, and his medical conditions were very, very tough. But there was something which Ukrainians couldn't still for long understand, because, of course, Ukrainians kind of know a lot about this Georgian success, as we remember in the mid-2000s of the Rose Revolution, fighting corruption, reforming the police. But later, Mikheil Saakashvili in Georgia was also responsible for, let's say, creating a bit of a police state in a way where the opposition was persecuted. There was quite a few things, and I remember I was reporting these elections. I was talking to you, we know each other for a very long time. There were issues with Saakashvili. So what I understand that there are still some people in Georgia who really kind of are very negative about Saakashvili. Would you explain really why? So many years has passed. Couldn't they compare? And also, what is the situation with Mikheil Saakashvili today? He's also very unpopular, what I understand, among some people in Georgia. There are still people who are very supportive of him. But at this moment, please explain Saakashvili's, position, but also maybe first, as a human being, I would ask, how he is, because I remember there were these horrible pictures of him under the hunger strike and in a very critical condition.
He's quite okay now if we compare his health status last year's status. He's quite well now. He's using the trials for political statements, and we can see him, talking a lot through the trials and, ensuring his supporters to go to the elections and to vote against the Ivanishvili. He is still visually not look like healthy person, but his condition is quite good, because 1 year ago he could not talk, he could not move. Now he is quite better. In respect of his image, of course, Georgian people became more loyal, after so long time. But there are still some category of Georgian citizens who can't hear his even name. Because during last years of his presidency, Georgia became a really police, state. a lot of human violations. There was no media space for Georgian journalists. I'm a witness of that. There was a really horrible situation in the prisons. He made a statement that, during his presidency that he's going to zero tolerance towards crime. So people who were going to the prison, they had a very brutal experience. How was an attitude towards prisoners? So, of course, business was not in the best situation. We had a lot of cases when business was just taken from some people. So people remember it. Some people are more, aggressive and still can't forget about this stuff. So they are not going to vote for Saakashvili's party. But still, Saakashvili's party has the highest rating if we compare to other parties. They are leading oppositional party. Now he's, leading them from the prison. But, nobody, for example, when now there are some names who can become a prime minister after the elections, Saakashvili's name is not there even from his party because it's not rational now to mention Saakashvili's name in this position, because it's more frightening those who just somehow, because of timing, forget about his presidential period. But he is still there. He's active. He's, if I can mention, quite rational now because he's, supporting all the oppositional parties, and he was among those who initiated even one joint, oppositional center. He wanted to join, and he was promoting to unite somehow all the forces against Ivanishvili, but it didn't happen because some parties wanted to be distanced from him because of this problem, what happened during these 9 years of his presidency. So we have now National Movement Center. We have now the center which is more closer to the national movement. For example, if I can mention the name of Nino Zhizhilashvili, he was a political prisoner, head of former Rustavi channel, critical channel. Then it was taken by Ivanishvili, and now he is a leader of party. He went to the politics, and also he is a founder of second-placed TV channel, TV Tavari. So he was a vice general prosecutor of Georgia when Saakashvili was in the power. So this another center is very close to the national movement, but still trying to distance from him. But they still, of course, have quite good relations. Of course, Misha said that number 5, United National Movement, is him. Number 4 is Nino Zhizhilashvili, but they have still, for the moment, 30%. So if we unite them, more than 30% they are getting, according to the polls, like GD has for the moment.
And then I would also ask to remind about the position of the current Georgian president, Salome Zourabichvili. There was an attack on her, but also there was some development, like she was this immigrant Georgian who came to Georgia from France while ago under the Saakashvili. Then she was on different kind of sides, and there was some kind of distrust. Maybe she was not that pro-European, maybe even controversial. But for the last years, she's playing a very important role as well, actually honestly supporting Ukraine, contrary to the position of the government. So, by the way, what are the chances of her to be, impeached, and how she is seen? Is it like a role for her for future, or she's just some kind of unification figure for this particular moment, like I'm speaking about the months and the next time?
Salome Zourabichvili is really finding her very best role in the process, because she became a symbol of pro-Western Georgia, outside of Georgia. And as after Saakashvili, according to the constitution, President of Georgia has no so much right as before, and Georgia is a now parliamentary republic, and Prime Minister has a main role in the government. Despite of that, Salome Zourabichvili traveled a lot during last year, promoting Georgian European way, ensuring our partners to vote for our candidate status and to support us as much as possible, despite our, pro-Russian government. So he distanced from Ivanishvili, as much as it was possible, despite she was supported by Ivanishvili during the elections, because Salome Zourabichvili was a candidate of Georgian Dream. She was a kind of an independent candidate, but she was supported by Ivanishvili. From the very beginning, we did not have so much hope for her, because she was like nowhere. She was just having symbolic role in the state. But after Georgian government decided to change the track of Georgia, she decided to play the role. So now she's one of the main targets of Georgian government. They wanted to impeach her. They even started the procedure in the parliament, but could not collect enough votes. So she is still a president. What she's doing now, she's talking to every political party, trying to be a kind of in the middle and to be the main negotiator among those who are not able to talk with each other in the opposition. During the last period, she got so huge effort to talk to every leader to somehow have the candidate of prime minister in advance of elections. She just want to somehow force opposition not to have conflicts after the elections, because after the elections, opposition has just 2 weeks to configure new government with a new prime minister. So she's doing a lot, and there is even a version that maybe it would be great if Salome Zourabichvili would be named by all oppositional players as a future prime minister, and all other 4 different coalition leaders could be maybe named as vice prime ministers for the coalition government. She's in the center now. People really, maybe I can use this word, forgive her what she said maybe in the previous times, because her messages was very unfair when she became a president. Even previously, during the presidential campaign, before she became a president, she was saying that Saakashvili started war in 2008, and it was a very straight pro-Russian message. Now she is not repeating it anymore, and she is very straightforward towards the European Union and very seriously opposing the Bidzina Ivanishvili. Now, this message that Saakashvili started war is in the narratives of Georgian Dream, and Ivanishvili even stated some weeks ago that he's going and he's promising to organize some kind of Nuremberg process for those who started war in 2008. And he meant Georgian President Mikheil Saakashvili. So he's, what he's telling, that Georgia started war in his country in 2008 when Russia entered the territory of Georgia and occupied the territory of Georgia. So it is so crazy, really crazy message. But they think that they are, somehow promoting their main positive kind of a moment of their pre-election campaign.
What are open relations of the current government with Putin, with the Russian leadership?
We don't know. There are some messengers. We can realize that, for example, Helsinki Commission some weeks ago, and it was even a bipartisan decision of U.S. Congress that it was a calling of Biden administration to sanction former prime minister and founder of Georgian Dream party, Bidzina Ivanishvili. And it was mentioned there that, of course, it was a big problem of backsliding of Georgian democracy, and plus because of his ties with Russia. So U.S. has a lot of information about that, but we don't know what kind of messaging channels, there are between them. We don't have documented, improvements.
It's easy very much for us to be confused, but in public kind of statements, how do they refer to the Kremlin? I understand that they became this vague about the war of Ukraine, but what they're saying about Moscow, do they just... I understand the message frightening the Russia would invade us, but is it like any kind of positive messagings about the Kremlin, the Putin, or things like that?
They are not mentioning Russia at all. For example, the Prime Minister of Georgia can have a speech in UN and not mentioning about occupation of Georgia. So this, narrative that Russia is an enemy, that Russia is an occupier, Russia is in the country now, in Georgia, occupying and arresting people through the so-called borderline of Georgian villages, that Russia is harming us, Russia is, still a problem for us. There is no any single word from Georgian government. When some years ago, acting Prime Minister Irakli Abramidze was asked why he is not visiting occupying territories of Georgia, he said, why I should go there? What to do there? They are even not willing to see the people, how they live in the borderline, so-called borderline of occupied territories, where they live in a scary situation and where they are having every minute problem with Russian soldiers and Ossetian soldiers. Problem is that Russia's naming is minimized in their narratives. They're not mentioning Putin, they're not mentioning Russia. They are just attacking US, just attacking EU, and, attacking through the messages which are created in Kremlin. Former ambassador of US in Georgia, Kelly Degnan, even she mentioned about Kremlin handout, how it was used in Georgia and how it was used by the Georgian government.
What are this situation with this government, which is very vague about a lot of things? But what is the situation currently after the full-scale invasion in South Ossetia and Abkhazia? Because, things change. So, for instance, Russia kind of almost occupied Belarus. You cannot speak about Belarus as a state. They don't have any sovereignty, as we can know. But they played the game that as if these parts of Georgia are independent. But what are they doing with these parts? And are they calling the people from these areas to fight during their war against Ukraine? Do you follow that? And what is generally the situation in there?
As you know, we have a Russian army between our occupied regions, so we don't have an access to go there. It's impossible. Everything is closed. Formal so-called border is working, and we don't have an access to another side. But actually, Georgian Dream wanted to use this topic for their pre-election messaging, because they stated that they will be able to unite Georgia if they stay in power. They have a hope that Russia maybe would support them in this respect, but Lavrov made a statement that, of course, we can be in the middle, you can talk to your neighbor states. Of course, you have to somehow have an attitude as real states and real neighboring states. In this respect, we will be able to somewhere in the middle and to be mediators in.
We saw what had happened in Nagorno-Karabakh, which was a long region, and, Russia played with Armenia. Yes, it was a territory which kind of belonged to Azerbaijan, but it's a bit of a different story. It's a complicated story, obviously, with the Armenians being there. But during the war against Ukraine, full-scale invasion, that was a moment where Azerbaijan could use the force, the Russia changed their alliances, and Yerevan, which was so much dependent on the Kremlin, especially because of that, they were in fact lost. So for us, it could be very curious, how they are playing with this, including the current government can play also, because this can be an interesting, I don't know if it's a proper word to use, a moment.
Yes, our breakaway regions are there on the spot, but when Georgian government is, spreading the message that, for example, Bidzina Ivanishvili stated in his speech in Gori, which is the nearest town to the South Ossetian, territory, he stated that we have to apologize, Ossetians, for the war. And it was a big shock for Georgians, big shock for refugees, big shock for all country, because it was not a kind of an initiative to reconciliation. It was just a matter to one more time underline that Georgia started war. It was a really pro-Russian, again, message. We have a different civil society in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. In Abkhazia, civil society is opposing really seriously pro-Russian, their so-called government. They had several issues. For example, they did not give from the beginning the Russians to buy the territories and to the best areas of Abkhazia, and the civil society is struggling very much with that. But it doesn't mean that they love to be back to Georgia. Our future government should really much work on that, to work with people, because it's not just a matter to get territories back. We need 100,000 of people have to be back in Abkhazia, Georgians who are internally displaced, and also we have to explain our, citizens in Abkhazia and South Ossetia that we will be happy with them, that we are a wealthy country, we are a European country, that we have a European Union membership future. Then they will be, I hope, more attracted than now, because now Georgia is a quite a weak state without clear future, because, we were the number one country in trio with Ukraine and Moldova in European Union path, because we were fulfilling our obligations in our best way. But now we are last ones, and we got a candidacy status, but we are not guaranteed to have it. The next step, like opening negotiations with European Union about our membership. And it would happen only if we had a fair elections, it is stated by the European Union, and if we actually, it's not sad, but it means that if we replace this pro-Russian party.
Nino, this year, since April, we were following, to extent as possible, the protests, which were very active in Tbilisi and in Georgia, against so-called pro-Russian laws, the laws on the foreign agents and the others, yes? It felt for some time that kind of the protests were over, the people, stopped to protest. You helped me to understand that, of course, after some time, it was a break because the decisive time is the elections in October. So, of course, the idea was to make it kind of more political. But what is interesting, that people indeed protest, but I want you to also speak a bit more about these ways how some particular legislation is introduced, which is very similar. It can be in Kyrgyzstan, it can be, by the way, in Bulgaria. And by the way, our colleagues and friends in Bulgaria were actually very much disappointed, saying look, we had similar kind of Russian laws being pushed, but people are not protesting. In Georgia, they at least protest. We looked at these protests. There was also the use of the police. The police, acted violently against the protesters. There is something painful for us to observe in that, in particularly because we're taking pride of the reform of the Ukrainian police, which was in fact done with the support of the reformers who created the new Georgian police. So there is some particular attitude about the Georgian police. So for us, it was also extremely disappointing to see, how Georgian police acted. We understand the protests were big. Is it really that they were over and it was just a pause before the elections? How people think about this protest today? And also, what did happen to the Georgian police?
Okay, let's start with protests. 100,000 of Georgians were in the streets during months in the spring, and protesting, this Russian, so-called Russian law, we are calling, not even law about Russian foreign agents, but it's Russian law because it's copy-pasted by Georgian government, parliament members from Russia. You know that Georgian government had an attempt to have this law 1 year ago, but because of huge protests, they stopped it. But suddenly they started again focusing on that, and they surprised really Georgian audience, because acting prime minister, for example, he stated a year ago that we will be never back to this law. And the Georgian Dream stated it openly. Okay, if Georgian people doesn't want to have this law, okay, we are not doing it anymore. But a year later, they decided to launch this law again. So people were protested. We had really brutal moments when police acted brutally with people. There were a lot of violations. There were abusing people in the street. For example, we had pictures when one really ordinary citizen is beaten by tens of policemen. And by the way, some days ago, the State Department of United States issued, sanctions against two persons who were involved, heads of Georgian police, units. They are now in the Magnitsky list. So I hope for the next time Georgian policemen will be more careful with that. But we can still say that police is entirely under the Ivanishvili's will. His personal bodyguard is now the Minister of Interior. So you can just realize how he can act independently. He is just following the will of his former boss and his acting boss. He's, very enthusiastic, who have, right to beat people in the streets. Georgian people really were quite unhappy with Georgian police, but we have to admit that a lot of policemen left the system after Saakashvili's period, so there are not so hopeful people in those units who are beating people in the streets. Of course, the whole police is not doing that. For example, patrol is not involved in so much in the process. Mostly special units are used for these cases in Georgia.
There is no way for me not to take this topic, because there was this horrible and tragic story of the murder of the Cesaria Abramidze, transgender model, who was killed. And one thing is, that if it's one kind of just incident, but we remember that in 2021 there was attacks on the Tbilisi Pride by some of the far right. What is the discussions now in the Georgian society about that? Was there any reaction? What I understand, there was also a kind of legislations which, let's say, you would explain maybe more in Georgia, in forest, where, these hatred crimes are not punished to the extent it's possible. Please correct me if not. But what was this for Georgian society?
Cesaria Abramidze was one of the brightest, one of the bravest ladies among transgender society, and we know her as a very active person, activist and citizen. He was on the screens and he was everywhere where Georgian society had problems. So she was a very active person. Everybody knows her. She was brutally killed. Of course, the Georgian government and Georgian new legislation has a kind of its collaboration and its kind of a role in this, because Georgian government and Georgian parliament decided to have anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. It is a sign that those people are not anymore welcome in Georgia. They have to be hide it. Of course, there is a kind of a message, okay, you can be in your home and you can do what you want to do, just not to be shown in the society. So according to this law, we have to even, cut the stages from the films where it's going, against all this law. For example, there is a scene where LGBTQ plus couples are having some relations. Okay, we have to cut it in the television. We can't show this anymore. So it is crazy stuff. And what the opposition is promising right now, they are promising to abolish these two laws, LGBTQ plus new legislation, and again, law about foreign agents. Those two laws will be stopped on the first session of the new parliament if they have a right to do it.
Is it the case, and that's what I understood from some conversations, that of course, there is propaganda, there is buying of the voters, political interest, buying and controlling of the mainstream media, but this play with kind of conservative values is also partially at heart of this campaign, where you would kind of like some of the people are ready to forgive Russia the fact that they invaded Georgia, maybe sometimes are ready to line with the pro-Russian politicians rather than just with it. It's something like, as it feels that this kind of it's not about the values, because what are the values if somebody kills a transgender person? There is no values in that. It's a murder. It's a tragedy, and you cannot speak about any conservative values regarding this. There is no value in murdering a human being. How it's really played in the discussions, to what extent it's used in the political fight by Russia, by Georgia, where they align, by Georgian government or some other forces in the country?
First of all, I would like to mention that Georgian society is much loyal now towards LGBTQ plus people in the society than it was previously. And we realized, this Georgian society, that they have the same rights as others. And of course, our constitution is guaranteeing their right. But again, if we come back to pre-election messages of Georgian Dream, they don't have anymore any specific economic, for example, promises about pensions, salaries, and, some traditional, messages. No. The first message is the peace. The second message is to have a, attack on national movement leaders and to have their, kind of a Nuremberg court for beginning of the war in 2008. And third is anti-LGBTQ actions, like preserve traditions and not to let Europeans and Western ideas to flow to Georgia. Those are three main promises that GD has, very general promises. So yes, LGBTQ plus society problems are still there, but they are using it as pre-election manipulative kind of a message, which is supported also by Georgian Church, which is quite strong in Georgia, which has a lot of followers. And, in this respect, Georgian Church, Orthodox Church and Georgian government are playing together. Yes, Georgian society is traditional. We can realize that Orthodox people maybe never accept some Orthodox people to have, these kind of societies openly in Georgia. But we know that every state has this kind of people. But state should be guarantee for freedom and for the constitution and for the rights of this kind of people. So for the moment, our government is not guaranteeing. On the opposite, they are encouraging all type of brutal actions against minorities.
I remember that shortly the situation with the media today, television is still dominating, the social media extremely important. But I remember that when there was this protest, in the end, it was a huge thing. I'm speaking about this year protest in Georgia. There were a number of the political reporters and journalists who actually came to the prime minister to talk. You were among them. Your interaction with prime minister of Georgia became viral on how you expressed, what's, becoming this people's voice. Can you just recall a bit that situation? What did you tell it? What was your message? Because you are a very eloquent, host and speaker and the voice of the Georgian people, being in this profession for so many years and very important voice for the Georgian media. What did you tell? What did he answer? Because you also knew the prime minister way before he became, Georgia is in the end a small country, people who are in the profession for clear period of time, quite interact with quite a lot of people also in the leadership.
It's a very complicated issue because the government has a very hostile and MPs are having very hostile attitude towards critical media representatives, including, of course, me. And it was a very strange when he invited representatives of talk shows of different channels, including critical media, when people were staying in the street and protesting Russian-style law. I had the honor to represent my channel, TV Formula, on this. It was not a press conference. It was kind of a gathering around the round table. And he had his own speech, how progressive the Georgian Dream's power is. And then we had each of representative of each channel had one question. So I decided to use not for the question, but for expressing my point of view, what I wanted just to tell him what's going in the street, what people think about him personally and about Ivanishvili and their pro-Russian government and what could be a cause of their activities. We had more than half an hour talk, quite hard talk, and he could not, of course, respond anything. He just told me that I have to train myself because I don't have an IQ, I don't have a culture, I don't have three words he was repeating, culture, IQ, and politeness. So it was a kind of a machine, responding me without any arguments, and it became really a viral video in different social networks. I can say that the government is able to listen for the moment. They are not able anymore to listen and to follow the will of Georgian citizens. We are very much hope that we, critical Georgian people, which are under 80% in Georgia, will win these elections, and we will then defend our rights, our votes, because there is still a kind of a scare that Ivanishvili can use all of the, tools to falsify the results of elections and to change the results of the election. So one is to vote against of him, and second aim is to defend our voices, our votes.
I would remember something else, maybe more kind of general questions, not really about current political moment. I remember when I traveled in 2008 to Georgia, you were already like a famous host running the newsroom of one of the big TV channels, but also being already critical to the government. And I remember there was this moment when you were critical to Shevardnadze government when it was necessary during the Revolution of Roses, and then doing all you can do professionally, absolutely professionally, for freedom and the rights to prevail. And I remember these moments when, the Saakashvili government was, let's say, taking a slippery slope. But we were discussing, you were way more experienced than me, that quite a few of your former colleagues and friends joined the government. They joined in particularly the institutions which were prosecuting already back then the journalists. I'll give you an example. For instance, for us, for Ukrainians, we all know Kahaladze is a famous Dynamo player, but he became a mayor of Tbilisi, but also quite a corrupt one and quite an authoritarian.
By the way, I would like to mention here that he is one of the most anti-Western, authorities in Georgia, most aggressive, trying to show himself as nice as possible with very good looks, but he's one of the, front runners against of Georgian citizens' will.
So we would understand that within these decades, people change. Even the destiny of Saakashvili, with whom we kind of know already for 20 years, it's complicated. But what was striking for me when you were telling how some of your friends, some people whom you knew very, very well, were taking, let's say, the side of persecution, even the side of evil, because it's not about them having a different political views. Your friends can have different political views. But they were, using the system, using the persecution, using the really power in order to suppress. And it's something which you probably experienced for the last 3 decades already. The government change in Georgia, the president's change, but there are constantly some of and it's a small country, some of your friends and people you respected who going to the other side, betraying the values they represented sometime when you were together. So my question, how you explain it to yourself, but the second, how you cope with that emotionally, how you keep your integrity, how is it for you to break these ties, to speak with them? What also helps you to go on without, sacrificing your integrity?
Yes, a lot of people during 30 years of Georgian independence showed to themselves as very brave people. And then, unfortunately, they showed how it is possible to lose main values and to have changes. Unfortunately, to be frank, I don't understand when journalists are going to politics. I don't like it. But, of course, I can't judge those who did it. I just think that when you're going to politics, there is no way to back to journalism. But in Georgia, we had these kind of cases as well. Yes, we had such cases. And, it is a matter of, I guess, for example, when some of my friends went to politics, they had, huge, ideas how to fulfill their, values and how to act as a parliamentary members, for example, or as a part of policymakers. How they did it, I guess maybe some of them did it successfully, some of less successfully, but still when it comes to journalism, I guess it's better to stay in the profession, to control those who are in the power. It's more, I guess, it's more comfortable, for me personally, to be outside of the power, to be distanced from them and all chances to criticize them and just to fulfill our role as a system which is created by society to control those who are in the power. And it is so important to stay as much, reliable as possible. And here I would like to mention that if Russian law is in action after the elections, then we are losing all reliable media outlets in Georgia. Everything would be finished with us.
We met in 2005 when you were already very famous and, you were very well known, one of the most important political hosts in Georgia for all this time. But what I remember, there would be always you in the end when the things would get, let's say, wrong or not very democratic in Georgia, you'll be in this kind of opposition channel, which won't be very rich. And then something happened with that opposition channel. And then again, you'll take the choice not to kind of go to another side. However, you always had the chances because there are quite a few friends of yours whom I know who are circle of journalists around you, but they enriched themselves. They became very famous. They became very influential because there is always this opportunity. So this opportunity was always for you there. It's really there. It's not like nobody offered you some. So my question is now with you speaking from the position of the channel, which also has the issues with finance, issues with problems when they can't fully work because of all the government restrictions, formal and informal. So why you make this choice for so many, many years to really stay on this side? And what gives you, the reason to do that?
I don't want to exaggerate in my role and to prize, any of my decision, but it's just my ordinary life to be there where I can criticize those who I have to criticize. So it's always the place where you can stay or where you can leave. For example, I worked for TV Maestro, which was the biggest channel against of Saakashvili's power in 2012 before the changing of the government. But as soon as the government has changed, Maestro decided to become a pro-governmental. So how I could stay there? It was not my idea to oppose just personally Saakashvili. I wanted to oppose the system, which was, including all other problems, having problems with free media. So how I could, just take a decision to stay in the channel, which decided to serve now new kind of a Saakashvili, new kind of a leader like Ivanishvili. So, of course, it was very natural when I found another place for work. And a lot of my colleagues did the same. But unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues now are serving for propagandistic media outlets. They are, circulating all these Russian propagandistic, messages without any shame. There was a kind of a borderline where I decided to openly even sometimes attack them because somehow it is considered that they are my colleagues and we have to, consider each other as colleagues and to be careful with each other. But I decided not to follow this way. And in my programs and openly during the interviews, I am always criticizing them. And I don't even sometimes consider them as colleagues, because when you are serving any authoritarian government or person or any group of interests, you are not journalist anymore. So journalists can then criticize you. So in Georgia, fortunately, we still have free spaces. Yes, some of them are more maybe tied with any of the political parties which are in the opposition, but it is good that we have variety. It is bad that we don't have discussions. We don't have debates. For example, now we are in the pre-election period. Some days are left until the 26th of October, and we did not have any single debate on the TV channel because, again, governmental people, circle of Ivanishvili is not visiting our channels and state-owned, but, pro-governmental channels, they are inviting opposition. So it is very strange election when there is no any debate, there is no any hard talks, there is no any natural moments which must be somehow on the place during the elections. Media is not in the best situation, but we are still there. We are alive and we are not, going to somehow capitulate.
give an advice for a younger journalist, for somebody who maybe, is taking the decision or maybe is just a bit lost because, this can be not that critical. It shouldn't be always like you're serving, but, there is always some choice to make. We're in a very difficult political situation in the moment in Ukraine because politics is not there. We're fighting the war. We don't have a very usual politics like we had before 2022, where you have a clear opposition, clear rules, there is a different way how journalists interact with the government. But of course, still this kind of temptations, these challenges are where do you criticize, where you not, where you kind of are invited to join. I'm not even speaking now about Ukrainian politics, inside Ukrainian politics. I'm generally saying, there are a lot of these decisions in the life. So maybe you, from your experience, would share, because you're teaching students as well. You're the dean of the media school in the end.
What kind of choice do we have in such cases? Salary, money, and principles. Fame and principles, values, ideas. So journalism is a profession of ideas, of principles and values. So if you are losing this sense, then okay, it's your choice. But I just can say that it is not a comfortable. It's more comfortable, more inspiring, more, big privilege to serve your people, to serve those who elected you as a person and who gave you an honor to tell the stories to them. So it is very obvious choice. Now, of course, if you follow principles, sometimes you can live not so well and not wealthy, but it is better for the future journalists. We are always mentioning it with our students that it is more comfortable space for journalists to follow their, heart and to stay on the place where you never be lost. It is a place where you find your voice and where you find your audience voice. I'm so happy when I'm following my students' career, and after graduating the university, we are graduating. I work for the private university, and we have not more 30 students graduates per year. When I'm following their career, almost none of them, maybe 1%. So we are working for and never have been work for pro-governmental media outlets, and I'm so happy with it. So when they have their fundamental, values on the spot, they just can't change it on any even very nice benefits. So yes, just stay there with your audience and stay there with your principles and values.
My final would be, where is your hope for Georgia? We talked a lot about the elections, about the opposition strategy, but generally if you speak about where you put your hope, because wherever you say, you explain the political situation, how things a bit get more clear for the last months or two, but for us observing from outside, it's more painful to observe, but where is your hope? I see you have it.
My hope is my country, my hope is in my society, and especially in younger generation, Gen Z, who showed themselves firstly in the street protests. They were so creative, so nice, so happy, and so principled that, and they are going to the elections. So they will surprise the government, and they doesn't matter. Bidzina Ivanishvili has 7 billion or 8 billion. They doesn't care about it. They will change. They will care about their future. So they are big hope of mine, of course, including our old generations of Georgians. So yes, let's follow the elections. In 26th of October, 8 p.m., we will have the first exit polls on my channel, and I will be on air. And I hope when we announce the elections results through our exit polls with Edison Research, it will be the results what the majority of Georgians are waiting for.
I wish you all the best. I know you'll be working hard for the last couple of weeks, so wish you a lot of strength and also luck in all this, and let your hopes come true.
And Natalia, thank you so much for your interest, and my best wishes to your audience. Stay strong, Ukrainians. Slava Ukraini. We are supporting you, and sorry for our government. Sorry for those, banners which are in the streets, and some politicians are speculating with your tragedies. So sorry for it, and you must know that the majority of Georgians are supporting you, and we consider you as heroes. We consider you are our, front runners, because we already had this kind of war. Actually, it was 5 days war. You had much bigger scale war, but we know with whom you are struggling, and the very best wishes in this very unfair and very brutal war.